10 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life by walking away from the most incredible man I'd ever met in Greece. I told myself it was better to keep our island romance perfect and untouched by reality. Now, I'm standing at my own engagement party, wearing David's ring, when his older brother walks in. The man I never forgot is about to become my brother-in-law. I stepped off the ferry onto the sun-drenched dock of Santorini, my backpack heavy with 2 months of European adventure and my heart light with the freedom of post-graduation life. At 22, I'd finally escaped the comfortable routine of my small-town life and was ready for anything the world could offer. The group excursion gathered at the harbor, 20-something backpackers from around the world, all seeking the same escape from ordinary life. I adjusted my sundress and checked my phone one last time before committing to my vacation mantra. No serious connections, no complications, just pure, uncomplicated fun. That's when I saw him. David Morrison stood near the group leader, his medium-length, dark brown, wavy hair naturally tousled by the Mediterranean breeze, wearing a simple white t-shirt that emphasized his athletic build. When he turned and our eyes met across the crowded dock, I felt something shift in my chest, a recognition that went deeper than physical attraction, like finding a piece of myself I hadn't known was missing. His smile was immediate and devastating, transforming his serious features into something that made my pulse race. 24 years old with an MBA freshly completed, Jake had the confident bearing of someone who achieved everything he'd set out to accomplish, but his intense dark brown eyes held a warmth that suggested adventure still called to him. "First time in Santorini?" he asked, appearing beside me as the group began walking toward our cliffside hotel, his American accent familiar and comforting after weeks of navigating foreign languages. "First time anywhere like this," I admitted, gesturing at the impossibly blue water and whitewashed buildings that seemed to defy gravity as they clung to volcanic cliffs. "I've spent the last 4 years in college in Ohio. This feels like stepping into a dream." His laugh was rich and genuine, making something flutter in my stomach. "Same here. My friends practically had to drag me away from job interviews to make this trip happen. I'm supposed to start an international business next month." "Supposed to?" I caught the hesitation, intrigued by this glimpse of uncertainty in someone who seemed so self-assured. "Let's just say Santorini has a way of making corporate plans feel less important," Jake said, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that made the Mediterranean sun seem dim by comparison. There was something about him that felt different from the college guys I dated, more mature, more purposeful, but with an underlying restlessness that matched my own desire for something beyond the ordinary. That first afternoon, we found ourselves naturally gravitating toward each other during the group's exploration of Oya village. While other travelers took obligatory selfies with the famous blue domes, Jake and I discovered a hidden taverna tucked away from tourist crowds, where an elderly Greek man served us wine that tasted like sunshine and stories. "So, what's your plan after this adventure?" Jake asked, swirling the golden liquid in his glass as we sat on a terrace overlooking the caldera, the setting sun painting the sky in impossible shades of pink and orange. "That's the beautiful thing," I said, my eyes sparkling with mischief. "I don't have one. For the first time in my life, I'm completely unscheduled. After this, I'm thinking of staying in Europe longer, maybe teaching English somewhere, traveling until my savings run out." Jake studied my face, noting the way freedom looked on me. Relaxed shoulders, genuine smile, the kind of unself-conscious beauty that came from someone finally living authentically. "That sounds incredible. And terrifying." "Why terrifying?" "Because I've had every step planned since high school. College, MBA, career track, 5-year plan. The idea of just wandering with no destination? It's everything I've been taught to avoid. I leaned forward, my hand unconsciously moving to rest on his arm. Maybe that's exactly why you should try it. The touch sent electricity through both of us, a current that had nothing to do with the warm Greek evening and everything to do with the growing connection that felt both effortless and dangerous. What if I told you that sitting here with you is the most spontaneous thing I've ever done, and it feels more right than any plan I've ever made? My breath caught, recognizing the shift from casual flirtation to something deeper and more serious than either of us had intended. That sounds like the beginning of exactly the kind of complication I came here to avoid. And yet you're not moving your hand, Jake observed, covering my fingers with his own. And yet you're not letting me, I replied, my heart racing as I realized that my rule about no serious connections was already being tested by someone who made me want to break every promise I'd made to myself about keeping things simple. The wine, the sunset, and the growing awareness that we were balanced on the edge of something that could change everything hung between us like a challenge neither was quite ready to accept or walk away from. Tell me something real about yourself, I said softly, wanting to know this man beyond the surface attraction. I have a younger brother back home, David. He's in law school, wants to change the world through politics. Everything I do is partly for him, building something he can be proud of, making sure he has opportunities. That's sweet. You're close? Very. He's the idealist, I'm the pragmatist. Perfect team. Jake's smile was warm but tinged with something I couldn't identify. What about you? Family? Just me and my parents. Small town, simple life. They think I'm crazy for traveling alone, but they're trying to be supportive. I paused. I love them, but sometimes I feel like I'm living their dreams instead of figuring out my own. Jake nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. To figuring out our own dreams, he said, raising his glass. To 7 days of not knowing what comes next. I replied, clinking my glass against his, not knowing how prophetic those words would become. Our week in Santorini unfolded like a perfect romantic dream. Every morning brought new adventures, exploring hidden beaches accessible only by precarious cliff paths, sharing meze platters in family-run tavernas where the owners treated us like beloved grandchildren, dancing until dawn at beachside bars where bouzouki music mixed with the sound of waves. But beneath the magical surface, both of us were carefully editing our stories, though not from any intent to deceive, simply from the natural caution of two people afraid to let reality intrude on something perfect. I didn't talk much about home, about the comfortable but uninspiring life waiting for me in Ohio, about my parents' expectations that I'd return, settle down with someone suitable from our small town, and build the kind of predictable life they'd always envisioned for me. The freedom I felt with Jake made my real world seem impossibly small and confining. Jake was equally vague about his specifics. He mentioned a business school, talked about his brother with obvious affection, but never shared his last name or exactly what kind of international business he'd be entering. His family sounded successful, but not ostentatious, close-knit, but not suffocating. Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life? I asked one evening as we watched the sunset from our favorite cliffside spot, wine making me philosophical. Every day, Jake replied honestly, like there's this path everyone expects me to follow, and I've been walking it so long I forgot there might be other directions. What would you do if you could choose anything? Jake was quiet for a long moment, his arm tightening around me as I leaned against his side. I think I'd travel. Really travel, not just business trips and vacation packages. See how other people live, figure out what actually matters to me instead of what I'm supposed to want. So why don't you? Because I have responsibilities, people depending on me. He paused. What about you? If you could choose anything, I'd take pictures, real pictures, not just tourist shots. Document stories, capture moments that matter. Maybe publish a book someday. Show people that there's beauty and meaning everywhere if you know how to look for it. So why don't you? Jake echoed my question back to me. Because it's not practical. Because my parents saved for years to give me a stable education, and throwing it away to chase some artistic dream feels selfish. Or brave, Jake said softly. We both fell silent, recognizing that we were talking around the edges of deeper truths about ourselves and our futures. Truths that felt too dangerous to examine too closely when we knew our time together was limited. Our idyllic week was constantly shadowed by the approaching deadline that neither wanted to acknowledge. My flight home was booked for Sunday morning, back to Ohio, where my parents were eagerly waiting to hear about my European adventure before I settled into the teaching job they'd helped me secure. Jake's return to New York was scheduled for the same day, where his new position and family responsibilities awaited. The outside world intruded through brief phone calls home that we both kept deliberately vague. "Having a wonderful time, Mom," I said during one of my check-ins, walking away from Jake so he wouldn't hear the conversation. "The group is great, and I'm learning so much about Greek culture." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Your father and I can't wait to see all your pictures. And remember, you start orientation at the school next month." The reminder of my teaching position felt like a weight settling on my chest. It was a good job, stable and respectable, exactly what my education degree had prepared me for. But after a week of freedom and possibility, the thought of returning to lesson plans and parent conferences felt like volunteering for a smaller version of my life. Jake's conversations seemed equally constrained. I caught fragments, mentions of starting Monday, family expectations, and David's excited to hear about the trip. But he was as reluctant as I was to let reality intrude on our bubble of possibility. Our last night together arrived with crushing inevitability. We'd spent the week carefully avoiding discussions of the future, but sunset on Saturday made evasion impossible. "So, Ohio tomorrow?" Jake said as we walked hand in hand along the black sand beach, the words hanging between us like a challenge. "And New York for you," I replied, my voice steady despite the ache growing in my chest. "We could," Jake started, then stopped himself, perhaps recognizing the same obstacles I felt. "What could?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to hear his answer because I sensed it would make leaving even harder. "Exchange numbers, email addresses, see if this could work long distance?" I felt my carefully constructed emotional distance wavering. Everything in me wanted to say yes, to find a way to continue what we'd started. But the practical part of my mind, the part that had been trained since childhood to be realistic about life and love, reminded me of all the reasons why it would never work. "Jake," I began, then stopped, seeing the hope and vulnerability in his eyes. "I know it's complicated. Different states, different lives, different plans. But what if we could figure it out? What if this is worth changing plans for? What if it ruins everything beautiful we've created? What if we try to force something perfect into reality and watch it break apart under the pressure? What if we don't try and spend the rest of our lives wondering what might have been?" The question hung between us, unanswered, as we made our way back to the hotel, both knowing that we were too afraid of losing what we had to risk finding out what we might gain. Our third night in Santorini brought a festival to the village, strings of lights transforming narrow streets into an outdoor ballroom, traditional music spilling from every taverna, locals and tourists dancing together in spontaneous celebration of summer and life itself. I wore a flowing white dress that caught the warm evening breeze, my long chocolate brown hair loose around my shoulders, my face glowing with wine and laughter. Jake couldn't take his eyes off me as I danced with elderly Greek women who'd adopted me as an honorary granddaughter, my joy infectious and completely unselfconscious. "You're staring," I said when the music paused, appearing beside him breathless and radiant. "Can you blame me?" Jake replied, his voice rough with want as he took in my flushed cheeks and emerald green eyes. "You look like you belong here, like you were made for this kind of happiness." The compliment was simple but delivered with such sincerity that I felt my carefully maintained emotional distance beginning to crumble. "Dance with me," I said instead of responding to the intensity in his voice. Jake pulled me into his arms as the bouzouki began a slower, more intimate melody. We moved together naturally, my body fitting against his like we'd been dancing together for years instead of days. Other couples swayed around us, but I was aware only of Jake's hands on my waist, his breath against my ear, the way my pulse accelerated every time he pulled me closer. "This is dangerous," I whispered, though I made no move to step away. "What is?" Jake asked, his lips brushing my temple as we turned slowly in the center of the makeshift dance floor. "Feeling this much for someone I've known for 3 days." "Do you feel like you've only known me for 3 days?" Jake challenged gently, his hand moving to cup the back of my neck, his thumb tracing the sensitive skin beneath my ear. "Because I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to find you." My breath caught at the raw honesty in his voice. I tilted my head back to look at him, seeing my own wonder and terror reflected in his intense dark brown eyes. "Jake, tell me you feel it too," he said urgently, his forehead resting against mine as the music swirled around us. "Tell me this isn't just vacation romance." "You know it's not," I admitted, my hands fisting in his shirt as I fought against everything sensible and safe. "But that doesn't mean—" Jake silenced my protests by kissing me, soft and sweet at first, then deeper, as I melted against him with a soft sound of surrender. The festival continued around us, but we were lost in our own world, tasting wine and possibility on each other's lips. When we broke apart, both of us were breathing hard, staring at each other with the recognition that we'd crossed a line that would make everything that came after feel different. "Come back to my room," Jake said quietly, his voice rough with desire and something deeper. I looked into his eyes and saw everything I'd been trying to avoid, the possibility of real love, of complications that would follow me home, of feelings too strong to compartmentalize as a simple vacation fling. "Yes," I whispered, throwing caution away for the chance to be completely honest about what I wanted, even if I couldn't be honest about where it might lead.
We spent the night wrapped in each other's arms, making love with a passion that surprised us both with its intensity and tenderness. In the pre-dawn darkness of Jake's small hotel room, with moonlight streaming through open windows and the sound of waves against the cliffs below, we whispered confessions and promises we both knew might be impossible to keep. "I've never felt like this before," I admitted, my head on Jake's chest, listening to his heartbeat steady and strong beneath my ear. "Neither have I," Jake replied honestly, his fingers tingling in my hair. "You make me want to forget about every plan I've ever made." "Don't say things like that," I said softly, though my heart leaped at his words. "Why not, if they're true?" "Because we both know this ends in 3 days." Jake tightened his arms around me as if he could hold on to the moment through sheer force of will. It doesn't have to. But morning brought harsh reality in the form of checkout times and departure schedules neither could ignore. My suitcase sat packed by the door, my plane ticket home tucked into my passport. Jake's bag waited in his room, his return to New York and adult responsibilities looming like a storm on the horizon. 3 more days, I said as we shared breakfast on the hotel's terrace, the words sitting heavy between us. 3 more days, Jake agreed, his coffee untouched as he studied my face, trying to memorize every detail. We spent our remaining time creating memories with desperate intensity, visiting every corner of the island, talking for hours about everything and nothing, making love like we could somehow store up enough connection to last whatever separation awaited us. On our final morning, we walked to the harbor in silence, both acutely aware that we were approaching a decision point neither felt ready to face. "I should give you my number," Jake said, as we stood watching the ferry approach that would take us back to Athens and our respective flights home. I felt my resolution wavering, seeing the hope and vulnerability in his eyes. Every instinct screamed at me to exchange information, to promise to stay in touch, to find a way to continue what we'd started. "Jake," I began, then stopped, knowing that saying yes would mean admitting this was more than a beautiful vacation romance, and I wasn't sure I was brave enough to deal with those implications. "I know it's complicated," he said quickly. "I know we live different lives in different places, but what if we could figure it out?" "What if we can't?" I asked quietly. "What if we try to make this work in the real world and it changes everything beautiful about what we found here? What if not trying means we never find out?" I stared at him for a long moment, seeing all the same longing and fear in his eyes that I felt in my own heart. "I'm scared," I admitted. "So am I, but I'm more scared of losing you completely." The ferry's horn blew, signaling final boarding. I looked at Jake one more time, memorizing his face, the way the morning light caught in his hair, the exact shade of his eyes when he looked at me like I was the most precious thing in the world. "Let's keep this perfect," I said finally, the words breaking my heart even as I spoke them. "Let's not risk ruining it with reality." Jake stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly, understanding my choice even if he didn't agree with it. "Perfect," he repeated quietly. We kissed goodbye at the ferry terminal, a kiss that tasted like regret and wine and the promise of a love that might have been everything if we'd been brave enough to find out.
Returning to Ohio felt like putting on clothes that no longer fit. My childhood bedroom seemed smaller, my parents' expectations felt more suffocating, and the teaching job that had once seemed like a safe, respectable choice now felt like voluntarily choosing a smaller version of my life. For weeks, I tried to settle back into my routine, but everything reminded me of Jake. Coffee tasted flat compared to Greek wine shared on clifftop terraces. The Ohio sunset looked pale next to Mediterranean skies. Even my parents' well-meaning questions about my vacation felt like intrusions into something too sacred to be reduced to tourist stories. "You seem different, sweetheart," my mother observed one evening as we prepared dinner together. "More restless. Did something happen in Europe?" "I just experienced a different way of living," I said carefully. "It's hard to readjust." "That's normal after travel, but you'll settle back in. You always do." But I wasn't settling back in. Every day felt like sleepwalking through someone else's life. I started my teaching position, smiled at the appropriate times, did my job competently, but felt like I was watching myself from outside, playing a role I'd outgrown. The breaking point came 6 months later when I was organizing photos from my Europe trip and found myself staring at pictures of Santorini for hours, trying to recapture even a shadow of the person I'd been there. That night, I made a decision that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. I quit my teaching job. My parents were devastated, confused by my sudden abandonment of everything they'd worked to provide for me. But I used my savings to buy a good camera and started building a portfolio, taking the kind of photographs I dreamed about during those wine-soaked conversations with Jake. Meanwhile, Jake had returned to New York and thrown himself into his international business career with the kind of focused intensity that impressed his supervisors and worried his family. He traveled constantly, Europe, Asia, South America, ostensibly building business relationships, but privately hoping that if he visited enough places, he might somehow find his way back to the feeling he discovered in Santorini. His brother David noticed the change in him during one of Jake's rare visits home. "You've been gone more than you've been here this year," David observed as they shared dinner at their favorite restaurant. "I thought you'd want to establish yourself locally before taking on so much international work." "The opportunities are better overseas," Jake said, which was partially true, but not the whole story. "Or you're running from something," David said with the insight of someone who'd known Jake his entire life. Jake looked at his younger brother, now in his final year of law school, already making plans to enter politics, still the idealistic dreamer Jake had always worked to protect and support. "Maybe I am," Jake admitted. "I met someone in Greece, someone who made me realize I have no idea what I actually want from life." "What happened to her?" "I let her go," Jake said simply. "And I've been trying to figure out if that was the smartest or stupidest thing I've ever done." David's law school graduation was a family celebration, marking not just his academic achievement, but his acceptance to a prestigious firm that would launch his political career. Jake flew back from a business trip in Singapore specifically for the ceremony, proud of his brother, but struggling with a growing sense of disconnection from his own life. "I have news," David announced during the family dinner, his eyes bright with excitement. "Professional and personal." "Tell us the professional first," their mother said, beaming with maternal pride. "The Hartman firm offered me a position in their corporate division, but I'm thinking of turning it down. Senator Williams approached me about joining his staff as a junior policy advisor. It's exactly the kind of experience I need for my own political future." Jake smiled and offered congratulations, genuinely happy for his brother's success, but feeling the familiar weight of being the responsible older son, the one expected to provide stability while David pursued his dreams. "And the personal news?" their father prompted. "I'm seeing someone," David said, his entire face lighting up in a way Jake had never seen before. "Her name is Sophia. She's incredible, intelligent, beautiful, talented. She quit her teaching job to become a photographer, which I think is incredibly brave." Jake's wine glass froze halfway to his lips. The description hit him like a physical blow, but he told himself it was just coincidence. Lots of women were intelligent and beautiful. Lots of teachers changed careers to pursue art. "She sounds wonderful," their mother said. "How long have you been dating?" "About 8 months. We met at a coffee shop. She was editing photos on her laptop and I was working on a brief. I spilled coffee on her keyboard trying to get her attention." David laughed at the memory. "Most embarrassing pickup attempt in history, but somehow it worked." 8 months is serious," Jake said, surprised by how normal his voice sounded, despite the growing alarm in his chest. "It is serious," David confirmed. "I'm thinking of asking her to marry me." The conversation continued around Jake, family members asking questions about David's girlfriend, but Jake heard it all through a haze of growing certainty and dread. The timing was right. 8 months ago would have been about when someone returning from Europe might have ended up in New York. The career change from teaching to photography was too specific to be coincidence. "What's her last name?" Jake asked suddenly, interrupting a discussion about wedding venues. Carter, Sophia Carter. She's from Ohio originally, but she moved to New York after a trip to Europe. Says it changed her perspective on what she wanted from life. Jake excused himself from dinner, claiming jet lag from his Singapore trip, and spent the night walking through Central Park, trying to process the impossible cruelty of the situation. The woman who'd refused to exchange contact information with him because she wanted to keep their connection perfect was now in love with his brother. Or at least David was in love with her. Jake had no way of knowing how Sophia felt, but if she was dating David seriously enough that he was considering marriage, she must have moved on from their week in Greece far more successfully than Jake had managed. Jake threw himself into work with renewed intensity, accepting every international assignment available, spending months at a time in foreign countries where he could convince himself that his growing success was worth the emptiness he felt whenever he thought about home. He told himself that Sophia's relationship with David was proof that their connection in Santorini had been exactly what she'd called it, a perfect vacation romance that had no place in real life. She'd been smart to end it when she did, and Jake needed to stop using her memory as an excuse to avoid building something real with someone else. But every business trip felt like searching. Every new city a possibility that he might turn a corner and see chocolate brown hair and emerald green eyes looking back at him. Meanwhile, I was building a life in New York that looked successful from the outside, but felt hollow at the center. My photography career was growing slowly but steadily, and David Morrison was everything any reasonable woman should want in a partner. Kind, ambitious, supportive of my career, genuinely interested in building a future together. We'd met exactly as he'd described to his family, a chance encounter in a coffee shop that had led to easy conversation, then dinner, then a relationship that developed with the kind of natural progression that felt healthy and adult. David never pushed, never demanded more than I was comfortable giving, and seemed content with the affection and compatibility we shared. But late at night, when David slept peacefully beside me, I sometimes found myself staring at the ceiling and remembering what it felt like to want someone with desperate intensity, to feel completely alive in another person's presence, to believe that love could be transformative rather than just comfortable. "You seem distracted lately," David observed one evening as we prepared dinner together in my small Brooklyn apartment. "Everything okay with work?" "Just tired," I lied, not knowing how to explain that I felt like I was living in the shadow of a ghost. "Maybe we should take a vacation, somewhere relaxing." David paused in his chopping to look at me thoughtfully. "Have you ever been to Greece? I hear the islands are beautiful." The knife I was holding clattered to the cutting board. "Greece? Too cliché?" David smiled. "I just thought it might be nice to go somewhere romantic. I've been thinking about our future a lot lately, Sophia, about making things more official." I stared at him, seeing the hope in his eyes and understanding that he was working up to a proposal, that he was thinking about engagement rings and wedding venues and the kind of future that should have made me happy, but instead filled me with a panic I couldn't explain. "David," I started, then stopped, not knowing how to tell him that the thought of returning to Greece with anyone other than Jake felt like a betrayal of something sacred. "Too much pressure?" David asked gently. "We don't have to decide anything tonight. I just want you to know how serious I am about us." That night, I lay awake, thinking about the cruel irony of my situation. I'd found a man who loved me genuinely, who wanted to build a life with me, who represented everything I should want in a partner. But I couldn't stop comparing every kiss to one perfect week with a stranger, whose last name I'd never learned. Couldn't stop measuring every sunset against the ones I'd watched from Jake's arms. 3 months later, David proposed on the roof of his apartment building at sunset, with a ring that was beautiful and tasteful, and exactly what the practical part of me had always imagined I'd want. I said yes because I couldn't think of a good reason to say no, because David deserved an answer, and because I'd convinced myself that love based on respect and shared goals was more realistic than the kind of passionate connection I'd experienced once upon a time in Greece. But as David slipped the ring onto my finger and kissed me with gentle celebration, I felt like I was sealing myself into a life that would always be second best to a memory I couldn't forget. Our engagement party was David's idea, a celebration at his family's penthouse to introduce me properly to the Morrison family and their circle of friends. I'd met his parents several times during our relationship, but David's older brother Jake remained mysteriously absent, always traveling for business when family gatherings occurred. "You'll finally get to meet Jake," David said as we prepared for the party, his voice warm with anticipation. "I've been wanting you two to meet for months, but he's been impossible to pin down, always jetting off to Singapore or London or wherever Morrison and Associates sends him next." "He travels a lot for work?" I asked, adjusting my engagement ring, which still felt foreign on my finger after 2 weeks. "Constantly. Sometimes I think he uses work as an excuse to avoid commitment. He's never brought anyone home to meet the family. Never stays in one place long enough to build something real with someone." David shook his head fondly. "But he's brilliant at what he does, and the international division has never been more successful." I nodded and made appropriate sounds, but something about the description nagged at me. A businessman who traveled internationally, who avoided commitment, who'd been successful in building something abroad while remaining distant from personal connections at home. The party was elegant but intimate. Close family friends, a few colleagues from David's firm, his parents' social circle. I moved through the conversations with practiced ease, discussing my photography and our wedding plans with the kind of social grace I'd learned since moving to New York City. "Sophia, darling, you look radiant," Patricia Morrison said, drawing me into a conversation with several other women. "David is glowing with happiness. We couldn't be more thrilled about the engagement." "Thank you," I replied, smiling the smile I'd perfected for these occasions. "David makes it easy to be happy." "And you'll finally meet Jake tonight," another woman added. "He promised David he'd be here no matter what. Family is so important, especially during celebrations like this." I was nodding politely when I heard David's voice from across the room, warm with genuine excitement. "Jake, you made it! I was starting to think Singapore had kidnapped you permanently." Something in my chest went cold. I turned slowly toward the sound of David's voice, and my world tilted off its axis. Standing near the entrance, embracing my fiancé with obvious brotherly affection, was the man who'd haunted my dreams for 2 years. Medium length, dark brown, wavy hair naturally styled back, intense, dark brown eyes, the same strong jawline that had been carved into my memory from 7 perfect days in Santorini. Jake Morrison. The man I'd fallen in love with in Greece was David's brother. The man's last name I never learned was about to become my brother-in-law. The stranger I'd refused to stay in touch with to preserve something perfect was standing in my engagement party, looking exactly as devastating as he had 2 years ago, but more sophisticated, more polished. Time stopped. The party continued around us, guests talking, music playing, servers offering champagne, but I existed in a bubble of recognition and impossibility, staring at Jake with the devastating awareness that fate had just played the cruelest joke imaginable. Jake's eyes found mine across the crowded room, and I watched his expression shift from polite social smile to shock so profound that he actually took a step backwards, nearly colliding with a waiter carrying a tray of glasses. 10 years collapsed into nothing.
I was 22 again, standing on a Greek dock with my heart racing at the sight of a stranger who would change my life forever. But now, that stranger was my fiancé's brother, and I was wearing another man's ring.
Sophia, David's voice cut through my paralysis as he approached with Jake beside him, both of them smiling, though Jake's expression looked slightly strained. Come meet my brother. Jake, this is my fiancée, Sophia Carter. I moved toward them on unsteady legs, my social training taking over, even as my mind reeled with the impossibility of the situation. Jake extended his hand with professional courtesy, but when our fingers touched, the electricity was exactly the same as it had been on that dock in Santorini. Pleasure to meet you, Sophia, Jake said, his voice carefully controlled, but his eyes holding mine with an intensity that made me grateful for David's presence beside me. Likewise, I managed, proud that my voice remained steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. David's told me so much about you. All good things, I hope? Jake replied, the polite small talk feeling like a mockery of everything we'd shared. Of course, David laughed, completely oblivious to the tension crackling between his brother and fiancé. Though you two have terrible timing, Jake's always traveling when you're around, Sophia. I was starting to think you'd never meet. The irony was so sharp it took my breath away. We hadn't been missing each other. We'd been living with the memory of each other for 2 years, letting that ghost influence every relationship we'd tried to build since. I feel like I know you already, Jake said quietly, his double meaning clear only to me. David talks about you constantly. He's very proud of his career, I said carefully, not trusting myself to say more. As he should be, and you've built something impressive with your photography, Jake replied. But there was something in his tone that suggested he understood the cost of building a new life on the foundation of old dreams. A group of family friends approached, eager to congratulate David and welcome me to the Morrison family. My fiancé was pulled into conversation about wedding plans and his career prospects, leaving Jake and me standing together with 2 years of unspoken words hanging between us like a chasm. We need to talk, Jake said quietly, his voice urgent with everything we couldn't say in public. Do we? I asked, though my heart was screaming. Yes, we needed to talk. We needed to acknowledge that seeing each other again felt like coming back to life after years of holding my breath. You know we do. I looked around the party, seeing David's happiness as he discussed our future, the Morrison family celebrating their son's engagement, the careful construction of a life that had no room for the kind of truth Jake and I represented. Not here, I said finally. Not tonight. Then when? Jake's frustration was carefully controlled, but audible to someone who'd once known him well enough to read every subtle shift in his voice. Before I could answer, David reappeared at my side, his arms sliding around my waist with the easy affection of someone who had no reason to doubt his place in my heart. Sorry about that. He pressed a kiss to my temple. Mrs. Hartwell wanted to know all about the wedding timeline. I told her we're thinking spring, maybe April? April sounds perfect, I said automatically, though the word felt like ash in my mouth. Jake's eyes never left my face as I played the role of the happy fiancé, and I could see him cataloging every careful smile, every measured response, recognizing the performance for what it was, because he'd seen me be genuinely happy before. I should mingle, Jake said abruptly. Congratulations to both of you. David, you're a lucky man. He walked away before either of us could respond, leaving me standing next to my fiancé with my heart breaking all over again. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and wedding discussions. I moved through the party like an actress playing a role, smiling at the right moments, laughing at appropriate jokes, discussing venue options and guest lists with the kind of practiced ease that had nothing to do with genuine enthusiasm. But every cell in my body was aware of Jake's presence across the room. I caught glimpses of him talking with family friends, accepting congratulations on Morrison and Associates' international success, playing the role of the successful businessman with the same careful precision I brought to my own performance as the happy bride-to-be. Our eyes met across the crowded room several times, and each glance felt like a secret conversation, an acknowledgement of everything we couldn't say aloud. The weight of our shared history pressed against my chest like a physical force, making it difficult to breathe in the overheated penthouse. "You seem quiet tonight," David observed as the last guests departed, his voice carrying the mild concern of someone who'd learned to read my moods over our months together. "Just overwhelmed," I lied, removing my jewelry with hands that trembled slightly. It was a lot of people, a lot of questions about the wedding. But good overwhelmed, right? Everyone loves you. My parents are thrilled, Jake seemed impressed, and Mrs. Hartwell has already offered to introduce you to her wedding planner. I nodded and made appropriate sounds, but my mind was reeling with the implications of Jake's presence in our lives. For 2 years, I'd managed to compartmentalize my feelings for him by telling myself he was a memory, a beautiful dream that belonged to another lifetime. But seeing him again, talking to him, feeling that same electric connection despite years of separation, made it impossible to maintain the fiction that I'd moved on. "You seem you, Jake, finally met properly," David continued, as we prepared to leave his family's penthouse. "He's been such an important part of my life, but his travel schedule has been insane. It means a lot to me that my 2 favorite people are finally connecting." The innocence in David's voice made my chest tight with guilt. My fiancé genuinely loved both his brother and me, and he had no idea that our connection predated his relationship with either of us. "He seems nice," I said carefully. Nice doesn't begin to cover it. Jake has been my hero since we were kids. Everything he's accomplished, all the sacrifices he's made for the business, I owe him more than I can ever repay. David's voice was warm with genuine affection. "He's the reason I could pursue law school instead of being pressured into business. He's carried that responsibility so I could follow my dreams." Each word was another weight on my chest. David wasn't just talking about his brother, he was talking about his hero, his role model, the person who'd shaped his entire life. And I was engaged to him while being in love with Jake. As David slept beside me that night, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process the cruel irony of my situation. I'd spent 2 years building a relationship based on respect and compatibility, carefully constructing a life that satisfied everyone's expectations while ignoring the part of my heart that had never stopped belonging to a stranger from Greece. But Jake wasn't a stranger anymore. He was David's brother, my future brother-in-law, a permanent presence in any life I build with David. The connection I'd severed to keep it perfect was about to become a family obligation that would torture us both for the rest of our lives. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I know I have no right to contact you, but I can't pretend tonight didn't happen. We need to talk about this before your wedding, if only to figure out how to exist in the same family without destroying David." I stared at Jake's message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard as I wrestled with 2 years of suppressed feelings and the terrifying possibility that maybe, finally, I was ready to stop living a lie. I spent 3 sleepless nights staring at Jake's unanswered text while wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. Every rational argument pointed toward deleting his message, continuing with my wedding plans, and finding a way to coexist with Jake as family without ever acknowledging what we'd once meant to each other. But rational arguments felt inadequate against the emotional earthquake of seeing him again. On the fourth morning, I finally responded. One conversation, to figure out how to handle this. Jake's reply came within minutes. Central Park Boathouse, tomorrow, 10 a.m. Thank you. We met like strangers conducting a business transaction, formally polite as we ordered coffee, and found a table overlooking the lake where families fed ducks and couples rented rowboats for romantic afternoons. The setting was painfully reminiscent of our evening walks in Santorini, when our future had seemed full of infinite possibility instead of insurmountable obstacles. You look good, Jake said quietly, studying my face with an intensity that made me feel simultaneously exposed and cherished. Different, but good, stronger. 2 years will do that, I replied, noting the lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and long hours building the international success David had mentioned. You look successful. Jake's laugh was rueful. Success is relative. I have everything I thought I wanted at 24, but it turns out none of it matters when you're carrying around the ghost of what might have been. We sat in careful silence, both acutely aware of the magnitude of what we weren't saying. 2 years of separate lives stretched between us. His constant travel, my relationship with his brother, careers built on foundations that suddenly felt unstable in each other's presence. Are you happy? Jake asked, finally, the question cutting through our polite small talk like a knife. I considered lying, offering the socially acceptable answer about contentment and wedding planning. Instead, I found myself being honest in a way I hadn't been with anyone since Santorini. I'm content, I said carefully. David is a good man. He loves me, supports my career, wants to build something meaningful together. That's not what I asked. I met his eyes, seeing the same desperate need for truth that I felt in my own chest. No, I say quietly. I'm not happy. I haven't been completely happy since I walked away from you. The admission hung between us like a confession in church, sacred and dangerous in equal measure. Neither have I, Jake said simply. I've spent 2 years traveling to every corner of the world, telling myself I was building something important, but really I was just looking for a place that felt as real as those 7 days with you. Jake, we can't do this, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. I'm engaged to your brother. You're David's family. Even if we wanted to explore this, the complications would destroy everything, Jake finished. I know, but that doesn't make the feelings any less real. David loves you, I said desperately. He talks about you like you're his hero. He credits you with making his entire career possible. And I love him too, which is why this is impossible. But Sophia, I need you to know that what we had in Santorini wasn't just vacation romance, at least not for me. Our coffee meeting was supposed to provide closure, a chance to acknowledge our connection and then find a way to coexist in David's life without causing damage. Instead, it opened a floodgate of communication neither of us had anticipated. Jake texted first. Thank you for being honest today. I know it couldn't have been easy. I replied, thank you for asking the right questions. Most people don't want real answers. What followed was 3 weeks of careful, increasingly intimate text exchanges that felt both dangerous and inevitable. We shared details about our separate lives, Jake's growing realization that his constant travel was a form of running away, my doubts about a marriage that felt more like a comfortable arrangement than a passionate commitment. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd given me your number that last day? Jake texted late one evening while David worked late at his firm. Every day for 2 years, I replied honestly. Do you think it would have worked? I think we were both too scared to find out. The question is whether we're brave enough to find out now. The subtext was clear and terrifying. Jake was essentially single, traveling constantly but unattached. I was engaged to his brother, planning a wedding that felt more like a series of obligations than a celebration of love. The only thing standing between us and the possibility of real happiness was the fact that pursuing it would destroy David's family and break the heart of the man who'd shown me nothing but kindness and respect. Everything changed when David announced that his law firm was promoting him to senior associate, a position that would require more stability and a public image that included a stable marriage. It's perfect timing, he explained over dinner at our usual restaurant, his excitement evident in every word. The promotion comes with a significant salary increase, and the partners like that I'm settling down. A stable family man has better political prospects down the line. I stared at him across the table, hearing clearly how our marriage fit into his career strategy, how my role as his wife was part of a larger plan for his professional advancement. What about what I want? I asked quietly, surprising us both. What do you mean? David looked genuinely confused. This is what we've always planned. The promotion means we can afford a nicer apartment, maybe start thinking about children sooner than we'd discussed. But what if I'm not ready? What if I need more time to figure out what I actually want from marriage? David reached across the table and took my hand, his touch kind but lacking any of the electricity I felt every time Jake's fingers accidentally brushed mine during family gatherings. Sophia, we've been together almost 2 years. We're compatible, we share the same goals, we want the same kind of life. Isn't that enough foundation for a marriage? That night, I lay awake beside David and realized that enough had become the defining word of our relationship. He was enough of a partner, I felt enough affection for him, our life together would be enough to satisfy most people's definition of success. But after experiencing what it felt like to want someone with desperate intensity, to feel completely alive in another person's presence, enough felt like volunteering for a lifetime of settling. I called Jake the next morning. I can't marry him, I said without preamble when he answered. Sophia? Jake's voice was rough with surprise and something deeper that made my heart race. My apartment, but Jake, even if I break the engagement, that doesn't mean we can— One thing at a time, Jake interrupted gently. First, be honest about what you want. We'll figure out the rest together. The word together hit me like sunshine after 2 years of winter, offering hope I'd been afraid to acknowledge and courage I'd forgotten I possessed. Breaking my engagement to David required the same kind of courage I'd needed to quit my teaching job and move to New York, but this time I was choosing uncertainty over security, authenticity over expectation. The conversation happened in my Brooklyn apartment, surrounded by the photography equipment and prints that represented the life I'd built for myself after Santorini. I can't marry you, I said simply, the words coming out steadier than I had expected. David looked up from his legal briefs, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally, hurt. What are you talking about, Sophia? If this is about the promotion timeline, we can discuss. It's not about timing. It's about the fact that I don't love you the way a wife should love her husband. The words hung in the air between us like a bridge burning. David set down his papers and really looked at me for what felt like the first time in months. We've been happy, he said quietly. Haven't we been happy? You've been happy, I corrected gently. I've been content. And you deserve better than a wife who's acting the part instead of living it. David was quiet for a long moment. and I could see him processing not just my words, but perhaps months of subtle signs he'd chosen not to see. My careful emotional distance, the way I never initiated physical intimacy, the way I'd built a life around his ambitions while never expressing any genuine dreams of my own. "Is there someone else?" he asked finally. I considered lying, but David deserved honesty after nearly 2 years of my careful emotional management. "There was, before I met you, someone who showed me what love could feel like, and I've never been able to forget. And now I understand that I can't keep pretending our relationship is enough when I know what I'm missing." David took the news with more grace than I had expected, perhaps because some part of him had always sensed that my heart wasn't completely his. He said, "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." And I could hear that he genuinely meant it. "I hope you find someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved," I replied, meaning it equally. The conversation about Jake came later, after David had processed the end of our engagement and started asking more specific questions about my reasons. "Was it Jake?" he asked 3 days later when he came to collect his things from my apartment. "The someone from before?" I could have lied, could have protected both of them from the complexity of the truth, but David deserved to know why his engagement had ended, and lying would only delay an inevitable conversation. "Yes," I said quietly. "But David, neither one of us planned this. Neither one of us wanted to hurt you." David sat down heavily on my couch, running his hands through his hair as he processed this information. "You met him before you met me. In Greece, 2 years ago. I didn't know his last name, didn't know he was your brother until the engagement party. And now? Now we're trying to figure out how to handle this without destroying your family." David was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him processing not just my words, but perhaps months of subtle signs he'd chosen not to see. My careful emotional distance, the way I never initiated physical intimacy, the way I'd built a life around his ambitions while never expressing any genuine dreams of my own. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it completely. "I tried to love you the way you deserved." "I know you did. And maybe that's the problem. Love shouldn't require trying." Jake learned about our broken engagement through David himself, who called him 3 days after our conversation with a composure that spoke to his political training and essential decency. "I need you to know that Sophia and I have ended our engagement," David said without preamble when Jake answered his phone from a hotel room in Tokyo. Jake's hand tightened on the phone, his heart racing with implications he didn't dare hope for. "David, she told me about Greece," David continued quietly, "about you two meeting before she met me." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He'd been dreading this conversation for weeks, knowing that any relationship with me would require destroying his relationship with his brother, but he hadn't expected David to learn the truth so directly. "I never meant for this to happen," Jake said desperately. "David, you have to believe me. I would never deliberately—" "I know. And I also know that you've both been miserable trying to pretend it didn't matter." Jake was quiet, not trusting himself to speak. "I love you both, which is why I'm telling you that I want you to be happy, even if that happiness is complicated for our family." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'd rather have my brother and my ex-fiancé find real love with each other than watch both of you spend the rest of your lives pretending to be satisfied with less." The conversation gave Jake both hope and permission, but also a deep understanding of the responsibility that came with David's blessing. His brother was choosing their happiness over his own comfort, and Jake would spend the rest of his life making sure that sacrifice wasn't wasted. He flew back from Tokyo immediately, canceling meetings and disappointing clients in favor of something more important than any business deal. Jake spent the week after his return crafting and deleting messages to me, trying to find words that expressed his feelings without pressuring me, that acknowledged David's sacrifice without making it seem like an obligation. Finally, he settled on honesty. David told me about the engagement. I know the situation is impossible and complicated, but I can't let you disappear from my life again without telling you that what I felt in Santorini was real, and it's only grown stronger over the past 2 years. My response came 2 hours later. I know it was real. That's why I couldn't marry your brother. And Jake, I'm terrified of what happens next, but I'm more terrified of spending my life wondering what we could have been. The exchange gave Jake the courage to do something he'd been afraid to do for 2 years. Stopped running from what he wanted and start fighting for it. But approaching me required more than just courage. It required a plan for how we could love each other without completely destroying the family relationships that had shaped both our lives, and a way to honor David's sacrifice while building something worthy of it. Jake realized that winning me back wouldn't just require proving his love, it would require proving that our love was strong enough to carry the weight of the complications it would create, and valuable enough to justify the pain it might cause. 6 months after I broke my engagement to David, Jake appeared at my Brooklyn photography studio on a Thursday evening, looking nervous in a way I'd never seen before. He carried a small wrapped package and an expression that suggested he'd rehearsed this moment countless times during his flights home from business trips. "I know I should have called first," he said, his voice carrying the uncertainty of someone taking the biggest risk of his life. "But I was afraid you'd say no to seeing me." "Why would I say no?" I asked, though my heart was already racing at the sight of him in my carefully reconstructed life. "Because what I want to say is going to change everything between us, and there's no going back once I say it." I stepped aside to let him into my studio, surrounded by my latest project, candid photos of real couples in moments of genuine connection, the kind of authentic love I'd been documenting while trying to convince myself I could live without it. "You don't need to be nervous," I said, but Jake shook his head. "I do, because I'm about to ask you to take the biggest leap of faith either of us has ever taken." He set the package on my work table and unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small, leather-bound book, the collection of Greek poetry I'd bought in that Santorini bookstore during our last day together. "How did you—" "I went back," Jake said quietly. 6 months after Santorini, I went back to that bookstore and asked if they remembered a young American woman who'd bought this book. The owner remembered you, said you'd talked about love poetry with such passion that it had stayed with him. He'd kept this copy hoping you'd return someday. I opened the book with trembling hands, finding a small piece of paper tucked between the pages, a ferry ticket stub from the boat I'd taken away from him 2 years earlier. I've carried that with me since the day you left. Every business trip, every meeting, every moment when I had to pretend that losing you hadn't changed everything about what I wanted from life. Tears blurred my vision as I realized what he was telling me. "Jake," he said simply, "I love you. Not the memory of you, not the idea of what we might have been. I love who you are now, the woman brave enough to leave a comfortable engagement to find something real, the artist who captures authentic moments because she understands how rare they are." "I love you too," I whispered, the words I'd held back for 2 years finally finding their voice. "I've loved you since that first sunset in Santorini, and I never stopped, not even when I tried to convince myself that David was enough." "I know this is complicated," he continued, his hands framing my face like he'd done that night at the festival. "I know loving me means dealing with family dynamics and David's feelings and 1,000 complications we can't control." "I don't care about complications," I said fiercely. "I care about you,
about us, about not wasting any more time pretending we can live without each other.
When Jake kissed me, it was with 2 years of accumulated longing and the sweet relief of finally coming home. I melted against him, my hands fisting in his shirt as I poured all my suppressed love into the connection that felt both familiar and startlingly new. "I can't believe you're really here," I whispered against his lips, my voice breaking with wonder and gratitude. "I can't believe it took us this long to be brave enough," Jake replied, his forehead resting against mine as we breathed each other in. 2 years, Sophia. 2 years we could have had together if we'd been honest from the beginning. "We weren't ready then," I said, tracing the line of his jaw with fingers that remembered the exact texture of his skin. "I needed to learn who I was outside of other people's expectations. You needed to understand what you actually wanted instead of what your family planned for you." We spent the evening talking through 2 years of separation, sharing stories about our failed relationships, our career victories, our moments of doubt and growth. Each revelation deepened our understanding of how much we'd both changed, while reinforcing how fundamentally compatible we remained. "What about David?" I asked as midnight approached, the question we'd both been avoiding finally demanding attention. "He knows," Jake said gently. "We talked before I came here tonight. He wants us to be happy, Sophia. It took him some time to process everything, but he'd rather see us together than watch us both spend our lives settling for less than real love. Will your family accept this?" "Eventually. It won't be easy at first, but David's support means everything. And once they see how we are together, how happy we make each other, they'll understand." I looked into Jake's eyes and saw the same determination that had attracted me 2 years ago, now tempered with the wisdom and confidence that came from surviving separation and finding the courage to prioritize authentic love over convenient arrangements. "So what happens now?" I asked, though I already knew the answer in the way he was holding me, in the way my studio already felt more like home with him in it. "Now we do what we should have done 2 years ago," Jake said, his voice soft with promise. "We choose each other, honestly and completely, whatever the consequences." "That sounds terrifying and perfect," I admitted. "The best things usually are," Jake agreed, echoing words from a lifetime ago as he kissed me again, sealing our second chance with the promise of forever. David's blessing proved crucial in helping the Morrison family accept our relationship. The conversation happened 6 months after Jake and I had started officially dating, during a family dinner where we'd finally found the courage to appear together as a couple. "I'll be honest," Patricia Morrison said, setting down her wine glass with the careful precision of someone choosing her words deliberately. "This situation is unusual, but watching you two together, seeing how happy you both are, it's difficult to argue with the results." "We never intended for this to happen," I said, meaning it completely. "Neither Jake nor I wanted to hurt David or complicate your family. But some things are worth the complications," David added quietly from across the table. "I'd rather have my brother and Sophia find real love with each other than watch them both spend their lives pretending to be satisfied with something less." The family adjustment took time. There were awkward moments, carefully navigated conversations, and a learning curve as everyone figured out how to redefine relationships that had become more complex. But seeing Jake and me together, genuinely together, authentically in love, gradually overcame initial reservations. "You know what convinced me this was right?" Richard Morrison said during our small engagement party a year later. "Watching Jake stop traveling so much. For the first time in years, he wants to be home. That tells me everything I need to know about what you mean to him, Sophia."
Our wedding was small and perfect. Immediate family, close friends, and the Greek taverna owner who'd served us wine during our first week together and had insisted on flying to New York to cater our celebration when he learned our story. Do you, Sophia, take Jake to be your husband, to love and honor through whatever challenges life brings you? I do, I said, my voice carrying across the small ceremony site with the certainty of someone who'd finally learned the difference between settling and choosing. Do you, Jake, take Sophia to be your wife, to cherish and support as you build a life based on truth rather than expectation? I do, Jake replied, his voice rough with emotion as he thought about all the roads that had led us back to each other. When we kissed as husband and wife, it was with the sweet knowledge that some love stories require patience, that the best connections survive separation, and that sometimes the most beautiful endings require the courage to disappoint other people in service of something true.
2 years later, I stood in our apartment overlooking the Hudson River, editing photos for my latest exhibition while Jake worked at the dining table we'd bought together. Our first major purchase as a married couple. The domestic scene was everything I dreamed of during those lonely months after Santorini, when I'd wondered what it would feel like to share space with someone who truly knew me. "How's the family portrait session going?" Jake asked, looking up from his laptop where he was reviewing reports from Morrison and Associates' newest international venture, a sustainable development project in Greece that would allow him to travel for work while building something meaningful. "Wonderful," I replied honestly. "It's amazing how much more authentic people look when they're not performing happiness." "Speaking of authentic," Jake said, closing his laptop and moving to sit beside me, "David called today. He wanted to let us know he's seeing someone seriously." "Really? Tell me everything." "Her name is Rebecca. She's a public interest lawyer, and according to David, she makes him laugh until his sides hurt." Jake smiled. "He sounds genuinely happy for the first time since before you two got engaged." I felt a wave of relief and genuine joy for David's newfound happiness. I'm so glad. He deserves someone who loves him completely. "We all do," Jake said, pulling me closer. "That's what you taught me, that settling for good enough is just another form of running away from what you really want." "And what do you really want?" I asked, though I already knew the answer in the way he looked at me, in the way we'd built a life that felt authentic rather than performed. "This," Jake said, simply. "You, me, a life where we choose each other every day instead of just once. Maybe a trip back to Santorini for our anniversary, to see how the place that started our story feels now that we're finally free to love each other completely." "That sounds perfect," I said, settling more comfortably against his side. "Though I have to warn you, I'm not the same person who left Greece 2 years ago." "Neither am I," Jake replied, his arms tightening around me. "We're better. We're braver. We're finally honest about what we want and willing to fight for it." As the sun set over the Hudson River, painting our apartment in the same golden light that had witnessed our beginning, I realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that survive mistakes, that prove themselves stronger than timing and circumstances, that teach you the difference between what's easy and what's right. "So," I said, looking up at my husband, "what's our next adventure?" "Everything," Jake replied, his voice soft with promise. "We have the rest of our lives to figure it out together." "Together," I agreed, the word carrying the weight of a promise that took 4 years to make, but would last forever. We'd learned that true love doesn't always follow a straight path, that sometimes the most beautiful endings require disappointing other people in service of something authentic, and that the best plot twists are the ones that lead you home to yourself and to the person who is always meant to share the journey.
Your heart knows the way.
Subscribe and follow the beauty.